But it's very easy for human beings to think that about other human beings, because no matter where you look in human societies, there are rank orders of value, right? In any hierarchy that we produce that's associated with some ability, we find that some people are so much better at whatever it is that they're doing that it's an absolute miracle, and most people are absolutely dreadful at it. And so, if you were thinking about inherent value as something associated with an approximation of skill or competence, then it wouldn't be obvious from the structure of the world that people were inherently valuable in that manner either, because there's such a rank order difference in our ability to do things. And you might say, well, that kind of averages out across things, but I don't think that's a very strong argument either. So it's bloody well not obvious, I'll tell you. It's not obvious where this idea that people are inherently valuable came from. That's a tough one. And in aristocratic states or tyrannical states, it's certainly not obvious at all that there's any acceptance of the notion that people are inherently valuable. It's like there's no necessary presumption of innocence, for example, and you don't have any sovereign right to your own destiny, like you're not granted the rights, not granted because that's the wrong way of thinking about it, your rights as a sovereign individual who has the responsibility and the capability to determine the destiny of the state itself don't exist. That doesn't exist as a concept, and so I don't see that there's anything there that speaks of inherent value either. So it's by no means an obvious concept. In fact, I think it's one of the least obvious concepts that human beings have ever come up with, that each of us in some strange manner is to be attributed some divine spark, let's say, that makes us equal in some fundamental way before God, before the reality of the universe itself, even in relationship to our own laws. I mean, if you want a miracle for an idea, that's I can't think of one that's more unlikely than that. So I've been puzzling over that for a very long time, because I cannot understand why in the world that idea ever came to be, or how in the world we ever agreed to act as if it was true. It's really something, and we should let that go. We let that idea go to our great peril. It's a fundamental, remarkable, fundamental idea. And what's so interesting about it, too, is that once you have that idea, weird as it is and improbable as it is, and you start to organize your social relationships in accordance with it, well, then they work. So my rule, too, is treat yourself as if you're someone responsible for helping. And it's sort of predicated on the idea that regardless of your inadequacies and your malevolence, which, I'm sure you have many inadequacies and no shortage of malevolence, just like everyone else. Regardless of that, you have a moral obligation, so that would be a responsibility, to assume that despite all evidence, that there's actually something of intrinsic worth about you, and that as a consequence, you're duty-bound to treat yourself like that is true. And then it turns out that if you do that, well, then your life gets better. And I don't mean happier exactly, although I would say it gets happier. I mean it gets richer and more meaningful and deeper and more worthwhile, and you become more educated and you become wiser, and you treat yourself with more respect, and you're a better model for other people, and you're a better father or better sister or better mother, whatever it happens to be. And you're less ridden by that guilt that gnaws at you, and shame that's there otherwise saying, you're not what you could be, you're not what you could be. And that's a hell of a voice to get rid of, and it's certainly not one that's easy to ignore. So that's a pretty good, that idea that there's something divine, let's say, that resides within you of ultimate worth. Even as a philosophical statement or a psychological statement rather than a metaphysical statement, it seems to be a precondition for establishing properly harmonious relationships with yourself. And that's worth thinking about a lot, that you have to, because you could think that in some sense you just own yourself, Because people do kind of make that claim, especially when they're trying to justify, for example, their right to suicide, that, it's your life, it's your body, you're yours to do what you will with. And if that was true, well, then it would seem to me that life would be a lot more straightforward, because you would just tell yourself things that you would instantly obey and believe. So first of all, you'd tell yourself all the things that you were going to do, and then you just run off and do them, which you don't, obviously, because it's much more difficult at that. And then you'd also say, well, enough of the guilt and the shame and the negative emotion and the disillusionment and the vengefulness and all those things that make life hard, especially the self-recrimination. It's like, what the hell do we need that for? And if we're our masters of our own destiny and owners of our own fate, then why can't we just command to ourselves that be dispensed with? And that doesn't work. I've never seen anybody able to do that. So, you can fool yourself for very brief periods of time into thinking that might work, but it doesn't work, and that's strange. And this is one of the reasons I love the psychoanalysts, because they were really the people, apart from the religious types, who figured out that whatever you are, you're not a unitary spirit that's under your own dominion. You're something like a loose unity of a multiplicity of spirits, many of which are doing their own thing, which you're striving to bring into some form of unity. But even that unity isn't something that's under your control in any real sense. It's a unity that has its own nature that you have to exist in relationship to. And I would also say that that's one of the things that keeps people's feet firmly on the ground, because otherwise it's easy to become egotistical and narcissistic. If you think that you're the center of your own being, in some fundamental sense, then you're only beholden to yourself. You're sort of a self-created creature. Perhaps you could think about it that way. But it doesn't work like that. It's like the ideal that constitutes the unity that you might become then sort of manifests itself as something that you could strive toward, but aren't. And it also serves as a judge. It's the thing that keeps you up at night saying, there's some things you're just not attending to, and you should get at it, because life is short and there's no shortage of trouble that you might end up in, and a wise person would attend to the dictates of his conscience and lay out his actions in the world according to what he knows to be true and correct. And that is how people think. And it isn't obvious why we think that way. This is part of the reason that it seems to me so obvious that we have a religious instinct, because I can't think of what else you would possibly call that other than a religious